It started on a late October evening. I'd been driving home from a friend's house in the countryside. It was a 3-hour trip, and I'd decided to leave late to avoid traffic. The roads were empty, just me and the occasional headlights of a passing car. The isolation didn't bother me at first. It was quiet, almost peaceful. About an hour into the drive, something caught my eye in the distance. As my headlights swept over the road ahead, I saw a figure standing on the shoulder. At first, I thought it was a hitchhiker. As I got closer, I realized it was a person in a clown costume. The clown was motionless, facing the road. His face was pale and painted, with a bright red nose and a crooked red smile. He stood completely still, his arms hanging limply at his sides. I couldn't tell if he was looking at me or just staring blankly into the distance. I laughed nervously, telling myself it was probably some Halloween prank. Maybe someone was filming a video or trying to scare drivers for fun. As I drove past, I glanced in my rearview mirror, but the figure didn't move. He stayed rooted to the spot, as if he were some strange statue. I tried to brush it off, but something about the encounter stuck with me. It wasn't just the clown, it was his stillness. It felt wrong. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, and I turned up the radio to fill the silence. 15 minutes later, the incident was already fading from my mind when I saw headlights behind me. At first, I was relieved. It was good to know there was another driver on this lonely stretch of road. But as the vehicle got closer, I realized it wasn't a car, it was a van. The van sped up until it was tailing me closely, its headlights flooding my mirrors. I couldn't see the driver, but the van's aggressive behavior set me on edge. I changed lanes hoping they'd pass, but they stayed right behind me. I felt a spike of panic and pressed the gas pedal harder. The van kept pace, refusing to back off. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the van swerved to the side of the road and stopped. My heart was racing. I debated pulling over at the next gas station, but there wasn't one in sight. Instead, I kept driving, checking my mirrors every few seconds. The van never reappeared. Eventually, I tried to calm myself down, convincing myself it was just a coincidence. A weird clown, an aggressive driver. It didn't mean anything. But as I neared a bend in the road, I felt my stomach drop. Standing on the shoulder, illuminated by the moonlight, was the clown. This time, I didn't slow down to look. I sped past without a second thought, not daring to glance in the mirrors. I don't know if it was the same person, if the van had anything to do with him, or if it was all some elaborate prank. All I know is that I didn't stop driving until I reached home, and I've never taken that route again. When Emma suggested a weekend getaway to a quiet countryside house, I thought it was exactly what we needed. Life had been chaotic, and the idea of disconnecting sounded perfect. The house was small but charming, with a big backyard bordered by trees that stretched as far as the eye could see. It felt like a little slice of paradise. The first night was uneventful. We cooked dinner, played some board games, and sat on the porch enjoying the silence. I remember Emma joking about how it was so quiet that it almost felt eerie. I laughed it off, telling her that was part of the charm. We went to bed feeling relaxed, the kind of peace you only get in places like that. The second night was when things started to go wrong. I woke up to a loud noise around 2 a.m., a sharp clanging that echoed through the stillness. It jolted Emma awake too. For a moment, we just sat there in bed listening. The sound came again, a metallic bang, like something hitting the fence. My first thought was that it had to be an animal. I grabbed my flashlight and told Emma to stay put while I checked it out. Looking out the back window, I couldn't see anything. The yard was empty, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. Emma stood behind me, watching over my shoulder. I stepped onto the porch, scanning the yard with the flashlight. Nothing. Just the same quiet emptiness as before. I muttered something about it probably being a raccoon or some other nocturnal creature, and tried to convince Emma and myself that there was nothing to worry about. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The next night was worse. Around the same time, the noises came back, louder this time. I felt Emma grab my arm as we both sat up in bed, wide-eyed. I didn't bother with the flashlight this time. Instead, I opened the security camera app on my phone, hoping to catch whatever was out there. At first, the feed showed nothing unusual. The yard was still, the porch light casting long shadows over the grass. Then something moved at the edge of the frame. A figure stepped into view and my stomach dropped. It was a man, a fat man in a clown costume. His hair was wild and matted, his face smeared with paint, and his costume was filthy, the colors muted and stained. He moved slowly, dragging what looked like a metal pipe along the ground. I froze as he approached the back door, rattling the handle like he was testing it. Emma whispered my name, her voice trembling. I didn't respond. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. The clown stopped suddenly and turned toward the camera. For a long moment, he just stared, his eyes wide and unblinking. Then he tilted his head like he was studying us through the lens. A chill ran down my spine. He knew we were watching. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained what was happening. The dispatcher assured me that officers were on their way. By the time the faint sound of sirens broke the silence, the clown had turned and walked back into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. When the police arrived, they searched the yard and the surrounding area but found nothing. I showed them the footage, hoping it would explain what we'd seen, but the officers just exchanged uneasy glances. They noted that there weren't any footprints around the porch or leading into the woods, which didn't make sense given how muddy the ground was. One of them reassured me, saying they'd file a report and keep an eye on the area, but his tone didn't feel reassuring. Emma and I didn't sleep that night. We packed our bags at sunrise and left as quickly as we could. To this day, I can't explain what happened. We never went back, and I didn't try to find out who or what that clown was. But sometimes in the quiet moments before sleep, I think about the way he looked at the camera, like he was trying to look right through me. It happened a few years ago, but I still think about it every time I pull into a parking lot at night. I'd run out of a few things at home, milk, bread, the usual, and decided to make a quick trip to the supermarket. It was close to midnight, but the store was one of those 24-hour places, so I figured it wouldn't be a big deal. The parking lot was nearly empty when I arrived. A few scattered cars sat under the dim, flickering streetlights. I parked close to the entrance under one of the working lights and headed inside. The store was quiet, just a couple of employees stocking shelves and one or two other late-night shoppers. I grabbed what I needed and headed to the self-checkout. It wasn't until I walked back outside that I saw him. A man in a clown costume was standing across the lot, leaning against a lamppost. He wasn't under the light, but just outside its glow, half in shadow. His costume was dirty, faded, like it had been left in the rain. His face was painted, but it looked smudged and uneven, the white makeup cracking under the streetlight. His eyes, though, that's what froze me in my tracks. They were locked on me, unblinking, even as I stood there holding my grocery bags. For a moment, I thought maybe it was some kind of joke or promotion, like someone hired to stand around for a party store or something. But there was no humor in the way he stared. He didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't move. He just watched me. I quickened my pace, heading straight for my car. The clown didn't follow, but I could feel his gaze burning into my back. As I loaded my groceries into the trunk, I glanced over my shoulder. He was still there, in the same spot, still watching. I got into my car and locked the doors, but I couldn't bring myself to start the engine right away. I just sat there, gripping the wheel, staring at him. That's when he did something I'll never forget. He started walking toward me. It wasn't a casual walk either. His steps were deliberate, almost slow motion, his shoulders swaying slightly as he moved. My heart was pounding. I turned the key in the ignition, but my car sputtered and stalled. I tried again. Same thing. The clown was getting closer now, his face coming into view under the light. The paint was smeared, his red nose slightly off-center, and his lips painted in an uneven smile that didn't reach his eyes. I fumbled for my phone to call someone, anyone, but my hands were shaking so badly I dropped it between the seats. When I looked up again, he was standing right in front of the car, his face inches from the windshield. He tilted his head, studying me. Then slowly, he raised his hand and waved. Not a playful wave, but a slow, deliberate motion, like he knew exactly how much it was terrifying me. I slammed my hand on the horn, hoping to scare him off, but he didn't flinch. He just kept staring, his hand still frozen mid-wave. Finally, I tried the engine one more time. This time, it roared to life. I threw the car into reverse, my tires screeching as I backed out of the space. The clown didn't move. He just stood there watching as I sped off. When I got home, I sat in my driveway for a long time, trying to calm down. I told myself it was just some prank, some guy messing with late-night shoppers. But when I checked the news the next morning, I saw a report about a man in a clown costume spotted near that same supermarket. According to the report, he'd been seen following a woman to her car earlier that week. The police were investigating, but they hadn't caught him. I never went back to that supermarket at night again. And sometimes, when I'm driving alone, I can't help but glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that clown's face staring back at me.